to not be in the recording, then you can please just leave your camera off. So a bit about Climate Justice Durham. We are a multi-generational group of volunteers. We're advocating for effective, equitable climate action in our community and beyond. So to address this crisis, we are advocating for better government policy at all levels. We're improving community awareness and understanding of climate change. We're urging our governments to build community capacity. We're seeing lots of variety: Oshawa, Newcastle, Don Mills, Tyrone from Whitby. I'm in Whitby, so I was just curious where everyone is from. So Climate Justice Durham, we're aiming to reduce the severity of the climate crisis. We're wanting to ensure that everyone is ready for its impacts, and we want to create a healthier, more sustainable future for all people. We started in 2019 as Fridays for Future Whitby, but soon we were doing more work in other Durham municipalities, and we realized we needed a more fitting name. So we became Climate Justice Durham in 2021. So since then, we've organized and participated in events like community cleanups, fundraisers, protests, local candidates debates, awareness and education events, and delegations to legislative bodies. So at the beginning of 2025, we wanted to help build education and awareness, so we started hosting learning circle webinars, helping folks learn and connect with smart, caring people doing work on climate justice in their own ways. The in your own ways part is very important because we know that every person has something to contribute to this fight in their own unique area. And no matter what you're skilled at or what you enjoy doing, there is something that you can be doing to help in this fight. So we are so glad to have everybody joining us for our this learning circle event. We've had some great speakers in the past, and we're hoping that you find that we are continuing this tonight. So against a backdrop of discussion about all these nation-building energy projects, tonight's very timely topic is the climate emergency and Ontario's energy future. Our goal is to present practical, factual information to educate and equip our community for action. We hope you hear something about tonight that will leave you inspired and empowered to act, building up our community and protecting our planet. If this is your first time participating in a Climate Justice Durham event, please let us know in the chat how you heard about it. We'd love to hear about that, whether that's from Julia's fantastic social media or our email list, or if a friend might have shared it over coffee. We love to hear how people are finding out. Before we begin in earnest, we want to start off with a land acknowledgement. Climate Justice Durham, we are active on lands that the Mississauga and Anishinaabe inhabited for thousands of years prior to European colonization and continue to inhabit today. These lands are today known as the traditional and treaty territory of the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, the Chippewas of Beausoleil First Nation, the Chippewa of Georgina Island First Nation, Rama First Nation, and the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We honor and respect these nations as rights holders and are grateful to them for their stewardship of these lands and waters. We also thank them for their willingness to share their deep knowledge of the earth and community to help us repair and rebuild our relationship with them and with the world around us. This is particularly relevant in the context of climate justice, especially in the recent events of the slew of anti-Indigenous bills passed that have implications for Indigenous rights and sovereignty, such as Bill 5 and Bill C5. Mike Boreas from Pickering, the radioactive city. I like that we're getting more people sharing in the chat. I don't know if I like radioactive city though, but if the shoe fits. So just some quick ground rules. Please be considerate of others, ask respectful questions, or you will have to be removed. You can put your questions in the chat, and if you like a question, then put a little thumbs up or a little heart, and we will know which ones folks want to hear about the most. That helps us kind of prioritize question asking. So Julia, our event manager tonight, Julia, give a little wave. No. Julia is giving a little wave. She is going to be taking note of the questions as they come in and kind of queue them up for Ralph to respond to. And Suzanne is going to be keeping us on time. So now let's introduce you to our speaker. We are so pleased to have as our speaker tonight, Ralph Torrie, the Director of Research for Corporate Knights, a research and publishing organization that produces rankings and financial product ratings based on corporate sustainability performance. He combines visionary thinking, intellectual leadership, and rigorous analysis, making original and important contributions to the field of sustainable development. Since the late 1970s, he has been working in the area of sustainable energy futures. His low-carbon scenario analysis for Canada was the first such study in the world. He is the inventor of strategic planning software for local government climate mitigation that was used by hundreds of cities on 5 continents. In addition to his consulting practice, he served as the assistant coordinator of the Energy Research Group of the United Nations University and the International Development Research Center, as a senior executive of 2 publicly traded management consulting firms, and as managing director of the Trottier Energy Futures Project. Ralph has numerous publications and is a recipient of the Canadian Environmental Silver Award for his work on climate change. He is an in-demand speaker, so we are extra thrilled to welcome him to CJD's third Learning Circle. Good evening, Ralph. You want to introduce yourself, and you can start whenever you would like.
Thank you. I will share my screen now with any luck at all. We had it working before we started.
Yes, Ralph is having some technical difficulties, so we have his audio and his lovely slides and brain to share. But unfortunately, you don't get to see his lovely face tonight.
I don't know how unfortunate that is for you, actually. But you can hear me okay?
Yeah. You need to go to projection mode though, Ralph.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort that out. How's that?
Better.
Good.
Perfect.
Perfect. I should stop then.
Yeah.
It'll be just downhill from here. So first of all, thank you for inviting me and congratulations on giving up an evening like this for a topic like this. It's I'm sure there's more fun things that you could be doing than listening to a presentation about Ontario's energy system. What I want to do is tell you about an analysis, a scenario analysis that I've been doing actually for all of Canada, for each of the provinces and for Canada as a whole. And I've been working on it for just over a year now, although probably I could also say I've been working on it for about 40 years. And the reason I'm doing this instead of retiring or something else with my time at my advanced age is that I look at the climate change emergency and I look at the clarity of the science and the power of the evidence that is moving forward at a terrific pace in the form of extreme weather and more intense storms and droughts and wildfires and floods. And I ask myself, how can denial of this problem continue in the face of such overwhelming evidence and such solid scientific theory and analysis of why it's happening and what the causal effects are? And it takes me into the realm of psychology. I think that the human brain will jump through cartwheels to try and avoid feeling any pain. And I don't think most people would like to believe that it's necessary for us to have a future beyond fossil fuels, while at the same time believing that it's impossible for us to have a future after fossil fuels. And I think that a lot of what I call climate denial 2.0, so not the just really stupid stuff, but the more sophisticated denial that comes in the form of people who will, at least on the surface, admit the science is true, but then proceed to deny it in their behaviors and in their decisions and in the policies that they put forward and perhaps in the large projects that they give priority to. And I think it's because if you don't really think that there's a feasible post-fossil fuel future, then your brain is going to try and help you believe that you don't have to, that we don't need to have one. I don't know if I'm making this point very clear, but it's a type of cognitive dissonance that people try to resolve. And it leads to this sort of denial of the problem, which I think would go away if there was a clearer vision of what the solution could be. That if we could demystify what a future after fossil fuels might look like. And that's really what I've been trying to do in this project, is describe in some detail, with quantitative analysis, sector by sector, province by province, the types of changes that would have to occur for us to get off fossil fuels completely, what it would cost, and what that future would look like in terms of energy security, economic development, employment, and all the rest of those attributes that we seek in our community and in our country. So that's really the impetus behind what's otherwise going to be a pretty dry presentation. But I hope that by telling you a little bit about why I'm doing this, that it might make it a little less tiresome. So this kind of work involves, it's called scenario analysis. And what one does is you go off into the future and pick a year, decide what you would like to have happened by that year, and then you work backwards to trying to see what a pathway to that outcome might be. It's actually called backcasting instead of forecasting. And in this scenario that I've been working on, it's of a family of scenarios that is often called the cornucopian school, in the sense that economic growth continues, population growth continues. There's no real introduction of what are called the sufficiency school measures, which I've also done some work on, where we start to really come to terms with the sustainability of our consumerism. It's an emergency response scenario. It assumes that the solutions that we need to address climate change are the solutions that can be implemented in the next 25 years. And therefore, there are certain things that we don't have time to wait for, like human nature to change, for example. And so it assumes a future that in many ways is like what we have now. It's just that the energy system would be different. And you can see in this bullet list, and we'll be distributing a PDF of these slides, and there's quite a voluminous report on all of this, which is just out for review right now, and which will be published within the next, I would hope, before the end of September, where there's a lot more detail. But essentially what I do is I set up these basic starting conditions, and then I go through each of the major energy using sectors. So this slide shows at a very high level the results for residential buildings in Ontario over the next 25 years as we gradually remove fossil fuel combustion from all of those buildings. So the red line represents the emissions from the chimneys and the vents of all of the boilers and furnaces in Ontario residential buildings. The gray shaded area is fossil fuel use, and the blue area is electricity. So right away you can see this is an electrification approach. If we are going to tackle the climate emergency, we have to stop using fossil fuels in the millions of vehicles and the millions of buildings that we have across Canada. And the second thing we have to do is make sure that however we're providing energy to those buildings and industrial processes and vehicles is also emission free. Well, the way you eliminate the emissions in the buildings themselves, and we'll come to the question of the electricity later, but the way you eliminate the emissions in the buildings themselves is to convert their heating systems and their water heating systems to electricity, utilizing heat pump technology, which essentially uses electric pumps and the wonders of thermodynamics to pump solar energy out of the air or the ground around your building and essentially concentrate it at a higher temperature inside the building. And that's why electricity use goes up. That's why the blue area is growing. It's because we're converting all of the natural gas heated buildings in Ontario over to heat pumps. And that's also why the fossil fuel use in our buildings gradually not that gradually, really, when you think that this is just 25 years, at the end of which there would be no more fossil fuel emissions in the residential buildings in Ontario. The electricity use, as you can see, will have grown from somewhere around 160 units. These are petajoules in this particular slide. It doesn't matter. uh, to something less than double that, uh, somewhere around 300 petajoules by the end of the transition. Uh, that blue section, that electricity growth that would happen in Ontario in the residential sector, here's two views of it. The one on the left shows how it would be made up of different end uses. And the important thing to note here is that there isn't a lot of growth in anything except the space heat, which is pretty much what we've been experiencing in Ontario for the last 20 or 30 years. We've had very, very little growth in electricity use. But that will change as we start to switch space heating over to electricity. That combined with the growth in housing that's inevitable as well. And so you can see it's really the growth in space heat which is driving the overall growth in electricity use in the residential sector. And you can see it grows from just under 50 terawatt hours per year. Now we're in electricity units up to 90. So less than a doubling, but getting close to a doubling. And the chart on the right, it's an important one to take note of. The dark green represents the electricity that would be used by the buildings that already exist today, the electricity that they would be using in 2050. And the light green represents the electricity from buildings that are new that would be built between now and 2050. So this is a retrofit challenge. I know people get excited about new building technology, and so should they. In fact, those are the same technologies that we need to apply to our existing buildings. But no amount of emission reduction in the new building, and we assume that they would be all electric, highly efficient, and all the rest of it, will address the fact that most of the buildings that will be standing in 2050 have already been built. And most of them are being heated with natural gas as we sit here this evening. So they have to convert. I do the same thing for the commercial and institutional buildings. And as I mentioned, these charts are at a very high level. The models that underlie these charts represent buildings by sector, by how old they are, by what type of building they are, and so on. So this is offices and retail and hospitals and schools and warehouses and theaters and all the rest of it, represented in one high-level chart that once again shows a transition from a mix of electricity and fossil fuel. And the commercial buildings have relatively more electricity use to start with than the residential buildings. But the end point in 2050 needs to be the same. Complete electrification of the commercial building stock, again with heat pumps. As far as efficiency improvements go, in the residential buildings that I had up a moment ago, I assume a basic 15% increase in efficiency. It's not a deep retrofit scenario in that sense, and we can talk a bit about that later if there's time. And similarly with the commercial buildings, I assume about a 20% improvement when they are refit, which is a fairly modest goal to be set, along with, of course, the conversion to heat pumps. Similarly, as I showed for the residential sector, it is the growth in space heating that really drives up the electricity consumption in the commercial sector. But once again, it falls just a little bit short of a complete doubling. It's pretty close in this case, though, of electricity consumption by 2050 as compared to today from our commercial and institutional buildings. And again, it's the existing buildings that continue to dominate, although to a somewhat lesser extent than with the residential buildings. This shows the similar chart, this time for all of our road transportation. So this is all of our personal vehicles and all of our commercial trucks, medium and heavy trucks, as well as all the light commercial trucks. And again, the gray represents the decline in gasoline and diesel use. The dark gray is is the trucks, so it's mostly diesel, and the light gray is our personal vehicles, so it's mostly um, gasoline. I think I've got that right. Yeah, the dark one is personal, sorry, and the lighter one is the diesel. They're about the same right now. You'll see it takes longer for the trucks to get completely done because of the current state of readiness of both the technology and the infrastructure. The other thing that this chart drives home is the incredible efficiency improvement that comes along with the transition from fossil fuel to electricity. The fleet of vehicles in 2050 grows from its current level of about 25 million personal vehicles, 24 million, to 29 million personal vehicles. And the trucks grow at a similar rate. So there's lots of growth of the truck stock. As I said, this is a so-called cornucopian type of scenario. And yet, if you look at the total energy use, which is the sum of those two blue layers, it's just over, you're just under 200 units by 2050, as compared to 650 units today comprised of fossil fuels. This is the power of electrification. This is why we can do it. Because when we switch to electricity, and this is true of heat pumps as well, it invariably brings these huge efficiency gains, which make the transition feasible, certainly more feasible than it otherwise would be. It might actually be impossible if it were not for the efficiency of electric technology. And what we're talking about here really is the end of the fossil fuel era. In many ways, it's the end of combustion. I mean, we will always use combustion for various things, but not to the extent that we have. It's a very primitive concept to use controlled explosions of petroleum fuels to create forward motion in a vehicle. And it's very, very inefficient. It's only a few percent of all the energy that gets released when the gas or the diesel explodes in the engine actually translates into moving the vehicle forward. And a tiny, tiny fraction of it actually moves the person whose weight is almost insignificant compared to the vehicle. So the whole fossil fuel vehicle system is almost laughingly primitive. And the same is true for the way we make electricity. The idea of boiling water to make steam, to turn a turbine, to make electricity, we'll look back on that the way we, look back on Fred Flintstone's car, I think. I mean, it's just crazy. It's fundamentally inefficient. And the electric technologies are a huge jump forward in the efficiency with which we use energy and in the elegance with which technology is able to help us. What we have here is another picture of the growth of electricity for transportation. This is just road transportation. I'm not talking about airplanes here or ships. I will be in a subsequent report, but this is the road transportation system, which is like 80% of the transportation story. And the layers are simply showing the growth of the different types of vehicles, aggregated in this slide into dark green for our personal cars and SUVs and pickups. Uh, the lightest, the darkest shade of green just above the personal cars are all of the light commercial trucks. And then you have two more layers above that for the medium trucks and the big Class 8 transports at the top. And then finally, to round out the understanding of what's going to happen to the total consumption of electricity in a future where we electrify almost everything, not everything, but almost everything. We have an estimate of electricity consumption from those other sectors that we have not yet gone into the same detail with. So heavy industry and general manufacturing, agriculture, the oil and gas industry itself. Of course, electricity consumption of that industry is not hugely important in Ontario, but it obviously will decline in the future in which the consumption of oil and gas itself is declining so dramatically. And then you can see a tiny sliver for other and non-road transport, which will remain. I mean, we're still a ways off from having sustainable ways of moving airplanes, especially over long distance. And the same is true for container ships over long distance. But we're getting there. But in the absence of the more detailed analysis of what the investments would look like in these sectors, we've assumed uh, high rates of growth in electricity use, that half of the fuel use in heavy industry gets electrified. 90% of the fuel use in general manufacturing gets electrified. Most agricultural machinery and vehicles gets electrified, and so on. And as you can see, it results in a very dramatic increase of electricity use from these sectors. I hope that when we look at this in more detail, that number will come down in 2050, but right now we have more than a doubling of electricity use from industry and agriculture. And uh, we wanted to get this into this scenario so that when we went to look at our electricity supply options, we would be including an allowance for the growth of industrial and agricultural electricity use, and not just for the buildings and the vehicles as previously described. When you add all of these together, this is what happens to electricity use in Ontario in a decarbonization electrification scenario, starting from just under 150 terawatt hours a year today. It grows to just over 350 terawatt hours a year by 2050. So it's actually more than a doubling. And it's interesting because I've done this for every province, and Ontario and Alberta are the two provinces that have the steepest growth rates as a result of electrification. Much more modest growth rates in the other provinces for various reasons I don't have time to get into. On a national basis, electricity consumption will grow about 77%, so less than a doubling. But Ontario is a real exception to that, and it's partly because of all the natural gas heated buildings and the scant use of electricity for baseboard heating. It's partly because it's a center of commercial activity and has a disproportionate share of the commercial and institutional building energy use. It's partly also obviously because of the center. It's a center for manufacturing and industry, and therefore subject to those very conservative growth rates I was describing a moment ago. And we also have more than our share of the Trans-Canada Highway inside the Ontario boundaries, which means the long-distance trucks tend to use more energy in Ontario than they do in provinces that have smaller east-west distances. You might be looking at that air conditioning sliver at the top and thinking to yourself, shouldn't that be growing a lot more? I was a bit surprised by that too. I've checked it. We assumed a 30% increase in cooling degree days, but we also assumed greater efficiency in the use of air conditioning equipment, especially as it becomes integrated with heat pumps. So the total consumption, it's growing more than, it's a bit of an optical illusion. It's actually growing a fair amount if you look closely at this, but it's not really what drives electricity growth as we move forward. What drives electricity growth in an electrification, decarbonization scenario like this is space heat and electric vehicles in terms of total energy. And here you see the same picture, only this time broken out by the various sectors. And the big wedges that are dark and light blue are the buildings, the residential and the commercial buildings. The two shades of green at the top represent the electric vehicles. And again, you can see that very significant growth in industrial and manufacturing electricity use in the gray layers at the bottom, which we've assumed as a conservatism in our study until we can replace some of those conservative assumptions with more detailed assessment, which we're starting into now. The other thing, however, and you'll hear people go on about this, is that this transition brings with it a big change in the shape of electricity use. And by that, I mean how much is used at different times of the year, especially. And what you see in this chart at the top is Ontario's electricity use today. And that purple bump in the middle of summer is the air conditioning load. And the red increases on the left and the right from January to March, and then starting up again in late November that, of course, is the space heating load as it exists today. And as you can see, Ontario is very close to having a, a, a summer and a winter peak that are about the same value. It looks to me like the summer peak is a little bit higher in this, which I think was the case and has been the case. But as the heat pumps gather momentum, you can see what happens on the bottom chart. And by 2050, that's what the time pattern from month to month of electricity use will look like in Ontario. Not only does it more than double in size, so all of those layers get fatter, but the red, which is the space heating, introduces a very strong peak that occurs during the heating season. This is a problem or a challenge. There's nothing to do with whether the system is provided with renewable electricity or fossil fuel electricity or whatever, or even if the heating is not provided by electricity. In a cold country, your space heating system will always be idle in the summertime. Your natural gas furnace is idle right now. The natural gas pipelines that feed this province have very little going through them right now. So there's nothing particularly unusual about this, but it's new for the grid. As we start to use our grid to heat our buildings, we are inevitably going to have the capacity to generate more electricity in the heating season than we will need in the spring and the fall, especially, and even in the middle of summer, because the heating peak will be so much greater than the air conditioning peak. So we just have to get used to that. It changes the electricity business in important ways, but most of our capital stock is like this. Our cars are parked 95% of the time. You know, we all own winter coats that we use for maybe 2 or 3 months a year. And as I said a moment ago, our heating system is not used when we're in the middle of summer. It's used for about 6 months a year. But as we start to use the electricity system as our furnace, we're going to have this issue of having to need more capacity in January and February and December than we need the rest of the year. Fortunately, if you're going to have idle capacity, you want it to be very cheap to operate if it's going to sit idle. And this is one of the strong suits of solar and wind and renewables in general, is that they don't really cost that much when they're sitting idle. And this sets them apart from fossil fuel and nuclear plants, which are expensive even when they're not operating. But this is a significant increase not only in the total energy being used in the form of electricity, but also in the extent to which we're going to have a strong heating season peak. Note also in the bottom chart, which of course includes, because it's for the year 2050, it includes electric vehicles and electric trucks. Those are the two green layers. They're not very peaky on a week-to-week basis at all. And they don't really contribute to the peak nearly as much as space heating does. So it's important when we're looking at how the electricity system is going to grow to distinguish between growth in total energy use, which we were talking about in the previous slides, and growth in the peak consumption levels, which is what these slides illustrate. So the way this kind of scenario works then is after having established the amount of electricity that's needed, and we costed all of that, and I can go into it, but we have capital costs for the conversion of the buildings and the conversion of the vehicles and the development of the electric vehicle charging infrastructure and all of that. Then you have the challenge, how are we going to provide all of this electricity? Now, I don't have the slides that I need to develop. This work, by the way, has only been completed in the last week or two. So you're seeing it for the first time. No one else has really seen a lot of this yet, except the people who are reviewing it. So I apologize for some of these noisy tables. But here we have a chart of the solar energy supply that we are assuming in our scenario. And you can see the Ontario line across the center there. And the first two columns show the electricity from rooftop systems and the electricity from utility scale solar parks, if you like, adding up to a total of just under 30,000 gigawatt hours or 30 terawatt hours. And then the next three columns repeat the same distinctions, only this time for capacity, so for gigawatts. So 27 gigawatts of solar capacity in Ontario by the year 2050. And finally, in the third set of columns, you can see the estimate of the capital cost for that amount of solar, 14 billion in building connected systems, 26 billion in utility scale systems, for a total of 40 billion over the next 25 years in solar for the province of Ontario. Hydro, there's not too much to say here. We're not going to double our supply of electricity by doubling our hydro supply. I mean, we're going to squeeze some more out of it through improving the efficiency of existing systems and so on. But we cannot, and this is true right across Canada, with the partial exception of Labrador and Quebec, we cannot turn to hydropower to provide the electricity that we will be using as we electrify heating and transportation. It really comes down to wind. I'm going to go into nuclear in a little bit more detail because I know that that's an interest of this group. So I put wind up first just to get it out of the way before we delve into the nuclear situation. But in a northern country like Canada, where there are real limitations to what solar energy can do for you, especially when you need electricity the most, which is during that heating season when the days are the shortest, uh, this is we've got a pretty aggressive solar scenario in that slide I had up a moment ago, but that's not going to do the heavy lifting for the electricity supply that we need to decarbonize. Hydro's not going to do it. That leaves us wind and nuclear, perhaps. Wind, in my view, is where the heavy lifting has to take place. And you can see here again the line for Ontario. There's a huge range in the amount of wind expressed here in the amount that we have today in that first column, about 5 gigawatts in Ontario, and the amount that we would need to have by 2050 in a decarbonization scenario, which ranges over a huge range. Could be as low as 31 gigawatts, which is, still 6 times what we have today, or could be up to 144 gigawatts. Both of those numbers are within the capability of Ontario's wind resources, but the prospect of trying to develop 144 gigawatts of wind energy in Ontario, the political pushback against that, I think, will be quite significant. And there's a way to avoid it, which I'm going to go into in a moment. But the resulting range in capital costs then for wind, anywhere from 60 to $250 billion, again, over this 25-year period. And the key to a more rational development of wind in Ontario is the Trans-Canada transmission link that we're proposing, and which is really a critical part of Canada's and Ontario's energy future. And I'll describe that in a little bit more in a moment. But let me just tell you a bit about the nuclear part of this. Because it has low greenhouse gas emissions. So if you're looking at the relative capital costs of different ways of coming up with this amount of electricity with low GHG emissions, you have to look at nuclear, not to mention the fact that we already have it. So I have three scenarios. The first one, nuclear A, is basically it's just letting what we've already got or what we've already committed to beyond the point of no return to proceed. So the committed rebuilds at Darlington, Bruce A, and Bruce 6 that are either already finished or underway, they get finished. But we don't do the rebuilds that are planned but have not been committed yet. As far as the what I call the prototype reactor at Darlington, I cannot bring myself to call it small or modular, but you know the one I'm talking about. We assume that Unit 1 is in this first scenario. Again, because I don't think that, I mean, you could stop it, but I think you'd still have to spend the money, probably given the structure of the contracts that typify that industry. So we left that unit in, our low nuclear scenario, but no more new nuclear builds, no Bruce C, no Wesleyville. LaPro shuts down at the end of its so-called natural life in 2032. By 2040, there would be only seven, that should be gigawatts online. And oh, maybe it is megawatts. I'm not sure now. Sorry. No, that has to be gigawatts. Sorry about that. Maybe. But by 2050, the only unit that would still be operating would be that Darlington prototype. If it actually works and works for its projected lifetime. So it's essentially a nuclear wind down scenario. A total of only $12 billion over 25 years would be going into the nuclear option. Behind door B, the nuclear B scenario, we go ahead with the planned rebuilds. We go ahead with the rest of those boiling water enriched uranium prototypes that they want to build at Darlington. We add the Bruce C reactor, assuming that it would be four 1,200 megawatt units. And that brings us up to $90 billion for 10.5 gigawatts online in 2050. And then finally, in the third column, and this is the one of particular local interest, we add in to all of what I just described a 8-unit, 1,200 megawatts times 8-unit station, which sometimes gets called the Wesleyville station because that's the site that seems to be favored for what would end up being the largest nuclear power station in the world if they built it. So we add that in for nuclear C. And by that point, our capital costs are pushing $200 billion. And this is using the US National Renewable Energy Laboratory's exhaustive study of nuclear capital costs, the medium scenario. There are higher numbers and lower numbers. We just went with the medium scenarios. There's not much disagreement at this point, even within the nuclear industry, that nuclear is very expensive. In fact, I've noticed in recent years that proponents of nuclear have stopped arguing that it's the cheapest source of electricity and are now falling back on other arguments for why we should build it anyway. So those were the three scenarios. This is the one that's in our reference scenario. This is nuclear A. And you can see it's the red. That's the contribution that it would make to our electricity supply in our decarbonization scenario. The green is wind. So you can start to get a sense, and the yellow is solar, and the blue is basically our legacy hydro. So you can see that nuclear's contribution to our total electricity supply in nuclear A is very close to zero by 2050. And this is with all of the committed rebuilds. They're all going to run out their useful lives before 2050. We've never had an old rebuilt reactor last more than 22 years. The industry says now they're going to last much longer than that. I'm not buying it. It's not good practice to assume something's going to last longer than there's any historical evidence to support. So I assume that the rebuilds will last 22 years, which is the longest any of them have ever lasted so far, which means that none of them are still running by 2050. So the only thing that's really left is that 300 megawatt experimental reactor that they're building at Darlington. And essentially, this is a nuclear wind down scenario. Interesting, though, if you look at nuclear B, well, first of all, let me show you another picture. This is what electricity use would look like in the year 2050 in that reference scenario with the nuclear A option. You can probably hardly even see the contribution from nuclear. It's that red line just above solar. That's that Darlington reactor that would still be running in 2050 and would have a few more years of life left in it before being shut down. And as I said earlier, I think our solar numbers are pretty aggressive on a national basis. It's like 1 million rooftop systems, and then double that in terms of solar park. But it just can't get the job done the way wind can. And so I've come to the conclusion that the inevitable uh, uh, main driver of an electricity system, not just in Ontario, but more generally in most of Canada, that would allow us to electrify heat, electrify transport, and come up with enough electricity to do that without using fossil fuels will have to come from wind. Uh, the next slide, yeah, I'm not sure I should spend the time to go too deeply into this, but this modeling was done hour by hour, province by province, end use by end use, because we were really interested in looking at what the shape of electricity would look like and what the interaction of storage and renewables would be. And as I'll explain at least briefly in a moment, we came down on the electric vehicles themselves being the best source of electricity storage for a renewables-based grid in Canada. And what happens is the top two pictures here are for winter, January day, average day in January. The bottom two pictures are for an average day in July. In each case, the top of the pair of pictures is the consumption pattern broken down by end use. So you can see the big red layer for space heat in the winter chart. And the second of the pair is where the electricity would come from. And you can see in the winter, a relatively small, short solar peak in the middle of the day, represented by the yellow hump, but most of the power coming from wind. And then in the summertime, you get quite an interesting different pattern. Obviously, no space heat, but a big air conditioning load that builds and builds during the afternoon. Uh, and you can see the corresponding supply in the final picture at the bottom that would meet that summer demand. And what's happening here in terms of the electric vehicles, in case you're wondering, in in the first and the third pictures where you see the dark green, those are the trucks, and we assume they're going to charge overnight, by and large. Not all of them, but most of them. And the lighter green are the personal vehicles. And because we're utilizing vehicle to grid technology, they're going to charge when the sun shines. And then they're going to feed it back. And anytime later in the day, and anytime you see that black line, like in the third picture, it's very clear. Uh, the electric vehicles are charging at uh, full steam ahead midday when the sun and the wind resources are peaking in Ontario in the summertime. And then in the later afternoon, as the black line, which is gross consumption, drops below the layers of supply, that's when the electric vehicles are actually feeding electricity back into the system to help with the air conditioning peak and later on to help with the overnight charging of the trucks. So it's quite beautiful, actually, the way this uh, works. And we end up with a very different type of electricity system than the one that we've had in the past, and we have to think about it differently and plan for it quite differently. This is a little bit more of a close-up look
Excuse
at
me,
how
Ralph.
yes. Did someone?
Excuse me, Ralph. Yeah, it's Suzanne here. I'm the official timer.
Oh,
I've been told to give you the 5-minute warning mark, so we have
okay,
time for questions. Thank you.
okay. This chart, which will be in the distributed slides, goes into a bit more detail on how this vehicle to grid concept uh, helps us develop the solar and wind resources and make efficient use of them. Another key concept that we've developed in this study is an integrated national grid tied together by a coast-to-coast high voltage DC transmission line. Uh, and again, I don't have the time to go into this, but when you layer all of the electricity consumption patterns of the provinces on top of each other, but shift them in time using the universal time so that they're all essentially our electricity systems would be behaving as if Canada was one big single time zone where electricity generated anywhere could be used anywhere. You get a much more a much flatter a less peaky system with much more efficient use of wind and solar. And this is the way that Ontario and Alberta and other provinces that would be hard pressed to develop the amount of wind that they need if they try to do it on their own, will be able to uh, make the transition to an electrified economy by being able to access the wind electricity resources, especially of Quebec and Labrador, but also of Manitoba and to a certain extent British Columbia. So it's quite an interesting story, and it's a nation-building concept. The way the construction, not just of a bunch of ad hoc province to province interconnections, but of a super highway from coast to coast, would actually facilitate the development of renewable electricity in Canada and cut, I think, about $200 billion off the cost of decarbonization. Um, this particular one shows it cutting a net of $100 billion. I'll just briefly also come back to nuclear. What we found with the nuclear scenarios, and I'll just show this in pictorial form because I'm out of time. Reproduced here on the left, you can see the scenario I already showed you, which is sort of the wind down. In the upper right is nuclear B, which includes Bruce C, but not Wesleyville. And in the bottom right is the sort of the fantasy scenario of the nuclear industry where they would get to build Bruce C and Wesleyville and the Darlington prototypes and all of the rebuilds. And you can see, even with that scenario, wind continues to be the heavy lifter. Furthermore, the net cost of the decarbonization scenario goes up the more new nuclear that you add to it. The nuclear C scenario costs $512 billion as compared with $451 billion for the reference case. So, and this is after taking into consideration the transmission and distribution savings that we have when we build more nuclear instead of wind. All of that is incorporated into this modeling, and still, for every dollar that we put into the new nuclear build option, we could get twice as much done if that same dollar was spent on the wind storage renewable combination. We looked at a lot of different scenarios on a Canada-wide basis. All I can say in summary is that the cheapest one has, you don't build new nuclear, you use the electric vehicles for storage, and you build that Trans-Canada link. That's the way you can keep the transition to an electric renewable future affordable. If you start doing stupid things like building new nuclear in spite of its cost, like relying on giant utility batteries when the electric cars could be used for storage, the cost could go well over $2 trillion. This is I can probably end with this. I mean, this is what the transition looks like. This is a one-time historical transformation, this electrification switch. It requires us over the next 10 years to make to have very strong growth in the climate solutions, the wind turbines and the vehicle to grid infrastructure and all of that. The growth rates actually are not unprecedented. The electricity system in Ontario doubled twice between 1954 and 1974. So the growth rates at a simple level are similar to what we've achieved within living memory. Obviously, it's a different type of growth, but the cost of this and the feasibility of this is not the stretch that it is sometimes made out to be. In fact, what we found when we pull back and look at the scenario in its totality is that this transition can be financed with the very money that is currently being spent on fossil fuels. In other words, as we phase out our dependence on fossil fuels, the cash that we currently spend on gasoline and diesel and natural gas is sufficient to finance a $1.5 trillion capital investment in a sustainable, renewable, electrified, decarbonized Ontario and Canada. So that's how I spent my summer vacation and also most of the past year. And as I said, this is a dry run. This research is very fresh. It's still under review, and I'm not used to presenting it. There will be a detailed report available within a month from Corporate Knights. If you watch my LinkedIn page or the Corporate Knights web page, you'll know when it's out. I've been dribbling bits and pieces of it out on my LinkedIn page, and I'll be sharing the slides from this evening's presentation uh, if you want to take a closer look. I'll stop there, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I think we have a bunch of great questions in the chat, which I think Julia is moderating.
Yes. So I'm just starting with a few, if everybody wants to go through and sort of heart some that they really like, I can pay attention to those since there's a lot of them, but I'll just start off with the ones that so far already have some likes on them. So, from Alyssa, so would the East-West energy grid be built while respecting Indigenous rights and lands and free and prior informed consent?
Yes. I don't know if there's any need to, it must be. It's a constitutional requirement for one thing. That's the way we do things. That's the way we have to do things in Canada. It's an electricity transmission line, so it needs to go. It's a linear thing. It doesn't have to be all done at once. I think more interesting is not so much the transmission line, which could run. It's like it could run along the Trans-Canada Highway, I suppose. It's the uh, it's the wind developments and the solar developments that we would be able to put in our best wind and solar regimes, which are very often on Indigenous territory. And the good news there, and it would be worth having a whole learning circle on this with someone who can really speak to it more than I can. But the Indigenous communities in this country are all over the renewable energy alternative. They are becoming major equity holders in wind farms and solar farms across the country, and they are making sure that those developments happen according, to their values and in respect of the land that they're being built on. And it's not we're an awfully big country, so the amount of land that's needed for this is not huge. In fact, I did an interesting thought experiment. The five largest hydro reservoirs in this country, if you floated solar panels on their surface, they would generate more electricity by several times over than Canada uses in totality. Now, of course, we're not going to do that, but it gives you a sense of the relatively small footprint that solar and to a lesser extent, but still also wind place on the land. And they don't necessarily take the land out of production either, not the way that they're being developed now. So I think, especially compared with the alternatives, uh, solar and wind have great promise to be developed in an ecologically sensitive and sustainable way that will align with Indigenous values, and they're going to have to be because a lot of it will be on their land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. As Alyssa said, it does sound like a great learning circle topic for the future. And Ian was just saying Durham Region has a bilateral agreement with the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation that contemplates collaboration on clean energy investment opportunities. So that's awesome, and we'll definitely look into that. Another question is, do these forecasts of winter peak take into account the effects of warmer winters, as well as more demand in the form of ASHP?
What's the second part about ASHP?
It says, do they, as well as more
Ammonia gases
demand?
just means air source heat pumps, is what I'm assuming.
I did not assume a warmer winter. In fact, I used the actual temperature records for Canadian cities from 2019 to stress test the system, and that was a relatively cold year. And the reason I did that is obvious to me, at least, that you've got to have a system which is capable of handling the cold winters. So I did not assume warmer winters. The way that we represented the air source heat pumps is and this is what made some of the modeling exercises so data intensive. We modeled the efficiency of the heat pumps in each province hour by hour according to the temperature hour by hour by mapping the temperature against the performance uh, efficiency curve for the cold climate heat pumps. And so the efficiency of the heat pumps declines as the temperature goes down, and that's reflected in the results that we're presenting. And it's the reason why it's the main reason why Alberta and Saskatchewan are up against it. The air source heat pump uh, doesn't really do that well in those cold winters that they have. True in Manitoba to a certain extent as well. Uh, and you combine that with the fact that the ratio of electricity prices to natural gas prices is very high in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It makes the heat pump business case difficult. Interestingly, if you, however, look at ground source heat pumps, and we did this, and in our final scenario, we assume half of the heat pumps in the coldest part of Canada would be ground source by 2050 because they perform well even in cold climates. They have a large premium associated with them because of the hole you have to drill. Looking at, I think we assume an average of $20,000 extra per house, but it does improve the business case for heat pumps in the coldest parts of Canada. It still doesn't come out looking great because of that price problem that I mentioned, but I think that the ground source heat pump is going to have its day, so to speak, starting in Western Canada. And it provides lots of work for people who know how to drill holes.
Awesome. Another question from Chris. What do you think about offshore wind in the Great Lakes?
I basically am okay with it. I live on the shore of Lake Ontario. Literally, I'm looking at it as I speak. And when I moved back here, this is my hometown, I couldn't understand why I never saw any Lakers going by because I remembered them from when I was a kid. And I went online one day and I looked at one of those websites that tracks all of the ships at sea, and there was a stream of Lakers going by right across from where I live. So then I asked Google, how far can you see when you look out from the shore of a body of water? 5 kilometers. So the to those who think that there's a visual pollution problem here, I think it can be I think it can be moderated. I don't know if it's the way to go in Ontario or not, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think some of the offshore proposals on the Grand Banks and the shallow waters off Nova Scotia have significant issues that are going to have to be resolved, but the Europeans are moving ahead pretty aggressively in addressing a lot of this, so we may be able to benefit from their experience and the way that you can anchor these things without disturbing the ecology of the ocean floor more than necessary.
Awesome. Another one from Mark. I have admired the Montreal Protocols, the CFCs, because it satisfied stakeholders, businesses, and governments in all agreement in the funding. Do you believe we need a similar model for decarbonization? And do we have that today, or what still needs to be done?
A similar model to the ozone protocol?
I'm assuming.
I'm sorry, I don't know the protocol being referred to. Which one?
It says the Montreal Protocol. I don't know if any of the
Yeah,
others.
this would be the ozone one.
There we go. Thanks, Alyssa.
No problem.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, we have an emergency, and when I look at the way we responded to COVID, just to take an example that all of you will remember, and there's other examples further back in time that most of us are too young to remember. But when a society genuinely believes it's facing an emergency, the first thing that comes to mind is not sitting down and writing up a protocol. You ask yourself, what do we have to do? Your first question is not even what's cost effective. Does anybody remember that question being put forward when the COVID pandemic struck? So, and we spent $250 billion 2 years in a row on that. Nobody asked any questions at the time. They're asking them now. But, you know, I can't help but feel that we've been dragging our feet on addressing the climate emergency by falling back into incremental, not only incremental technological approaches, but incremental policy approaches as well. We have to we have to move on this like we've never moved on anything in the energy sector before. And I obviously I'm not going to oppose people sitting down and signing an agreement to do it, but we've had agreements, we've had targets, we've had international conferences of the parties ad nauseum on this. Uh, and we are not seeing the curve bend. And I think we just need much more proactive leadership, not only from government, by the way, but from business as well. Uh, the things that are holding us back now are not technological, they're not even fundamentally economic. It's just a lack of business and finance and institutional innovation and just getting on with the job of training up the workforce and coming up with the financial schemes that are necessary to move this forward. Retrofits are a great example. We talk about, oh, how can we give grants to homeowners? Come on, we don't take that approach to power plants or tar sands plants or any other big thing that we've ever done. We figure out how to get the investment where it needs to be so that the homeowner and the household ends up not bearing that front end cost, but rather they will pay for it, of course, but they can pay for it over the long haul. When you squeeze the pump handle at the gas station or flip the light switch in your house, you're activating a multi-billion-dollar system that is built up over decades. And for you, it's $1.30 a liter or it's, 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And that makes multi-billion-dollar investments happening. But then we come to the switch to renewables, and suddenly it's all about, well, let's give people grants. It's not going to happen that way. The homeowners, when it comes to electrifying the building stock, they have to be completely indemnified from risk and upfront capital, in my view. The whole thing needs to be treated as an investment, as a financing challenge, basically. And where is the innovation? Why are we not seeing innovative approaches to financing not just dozens, but hundreds and thousands of home conversions to heat pumps at a time in a way that the homeowners bear no upfront cost, in a way that their total cost of ownership doesn't go up, in a way that ensures that the disruption to their routine is absolutely minimized, and which guarantees results. That's the way, this should be done. If we wait for individual homeowners, many of them will never have the capital, and the ones that don't have the capital will end up resenting the whole initiative, which ends up undermining the political support we need for the broader transition. So I'm straying away from your original question, but yeah, sure. So, I sign all the agreements you like, but it's choosing time. It's time to actually get the shovels in the ground on this stuff.
So we'll probably have time for one or two more questions. Tom asks, what grid enhancements will be required to handle the load for winter space heating?
Well, that's an interesting question that doesn't have a simple answer, at least not one that I know. And it varies a lot from province to province. In a province like Quebec, for example, 70% of the residential buildings are already heated with electric baseboards. So for them, there shouldn't be any issue with their distribution system. If anything, the conversion to heat pumps in that province will free up capacity in the transmission system, and it will free up electricity that they can then either export or use for other purposes. The provinces that have the greater challenges are the colder provinces and again Ontario, where we have a large percentage of homes that are heated with natural gas. And the question is, can they convert to heat pumps without the need to upgrade the local distribution or without the need to upgrade the panel in their home? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. I think Brian Kelly probably have something to say about this because I know he's running a heat pump and an EV charging in his home and doing it on a 100 amp panel, if I'm not mistaken. So I think if we're clever about this and we apply modern control technologies, and there's a lot of innovation being focused on this question right now, combined with the way that we utilize the batteries in the electric vehicles and the way that we develop microgrid technology at the neighborhood level, I'm not sure that we're going to have to upgrade the all the transformers at the neighborhood level, for example. That I think we should try and find a way to do this so that we can minimize that kind of investment in the distribution system. And I think information and control technologies are going to have a big part to play in that. The larger investment in the transmission side, and to a certain extent, the higher voltage distribution network that people talk about has more to do with the tens of thousands of wind turbines that we're talking about across the country and the need for all of them to be connected to the grid and for that power to be delivered to the cities and so on. So there's significant transmission and distribution investments. It makes up a very significant portion of our scenario and most electrification scenarios. It's anywhere from 30 to 40% of the total investment in the electricity system going forward is going to be in the transmission and distribution and sort of smart technology stuff. It's going to make this work.
Mm. So another question from Ian, wondering about the potential for local thermal energy networks / district energy systems to reduce the need for electrified heating and all associated infrastructure investment on the grid.
Well, the advantage that electricity has over district energy is that, and this kind of relates to the previous question, the distribution system already extends into every building in the country. District energy, on the other hand, involves delivering heat in the form of probably hot water through pipes that are buried in trenches that have to be dug and covered over. And so if you're talking about the vast majority of Canadian housing and buildings, which are in suburbia, and the cost of putting a district energy system in place, it just seems we're not going to get that done on the timeline that we need, for one thing. And it doesn't strike me as a particularly elegant or smart way to meet our heating energy requirements when all the heat we need is right outside our window. We just need to, pump it in. I think that in some situations, however, where there are already distribution networks in place, and possibly also in some urban centers where the density of buildings is high enough to support the capital investment and put up with the disruption that would come with putting a set of district heating pipes in place, there could be a role for it. I think it's going to be very expensive and difficult to sell as a greenfield concept. Also, where is the heat coming from? The amount of heat that we need is large. It's not going to come from landfills. It's not going to come from industrial waste. You can do a certain amount, but in terms of something that's big enough to really provide all of the heat energy we need, I think we have to tap into the heat that's in the atmosphere and that is in the ground. Nuclear sometimes gets put forward as a possibility, and I know there's a group in Ottawa that is, I think they're called the Boltzmann Institute, that has been pushing the idea of using waste heat from from Pickering nuclear power plant, piping it to Toronto to heat homes in Toronto. It just seems like uh, it just seems not feasible to me. I don't think Torontonians, especially after what's been going on with the Anglican light rail, are going to be too open to suggestions from people that want to come and dig up their neighborhood to put a district energy system in place. I just don't think it's going to work here. It works in Northern Europe. It has an historical context there and a built infrastructure that is easy to extend, but I don't think it's going to happen in the North American context, except on a niche basis. There's a system in downtown Ottawa. There's a system, a lot of university campuses are doing it, but it can be combined with very large heat pumps, which we're seeing some of that going on in Scandinavia. That's an interesting concept. But again, I just find the capital investment in the distribution of the distribution piping network that's necessary. Plus you're going to have to convert all of the homes from whatever system they're using now. I just don't see how it's going to compete with electrification. But I'm willing to be convinced. I haven't been yet.
Sounds good. So we're just going to do one more final question. So from Trevor, sort of in regards to what we've been talking about, any suggestions for how we push politicians, businesses, and communities to act?
Oh, I mean, that's another whole learning circle. The level of government that the two levels of government that I guess are most interesting in terms of responding to that are the local level and the provincial level, which constitutionally, I guess, are the same thing, but they, in practical terms, have very different spheres of influence. At the provincial level, I don't know. I mean, we just have to keep um, pushing the evidence-based case for a renewables-based electricity future for Ontario. That's partly what we're trying to do with this analysis that I've been working on, and uh, opposing, the more egregious malinvestment proposals that come forward, like the very idea of the Wesleyville nuclear station is just crazy to me. The Not so much, and partly because it's nuclear and therefore extremely expensive, but just the whole idea of steam. The age of steam is coming to an end, and nuclear power, which is so fundamentally inefficient because of it's limited by the Carnot efficiency limitations. It just seems like a technology whose time has already passed, and I know we've got a big vested interest in it in this province, especially in this part of Ontario. And it's going to take a lot of political skills to navigate the transition away from the dependence that we've built up on nuclear. But I just can't see it having a long-term role in our electricity future. It's too expensive, too risky, too slow, and can't compete with the new technologies that are coming on and which the rest of the world is pursuing with a vengeance. I think I've strayed from your question. Local government, I mean, if you're not already a member of Climate Justice Durham, one thing you can do is join, because the key to being effective at moving local government is to organize with your neighbors and then learn from other communities, join the Clean Air Alliance, uh, uh, join the other networks of local environmental initiatives that are out there, because very often things that are being done in one community can be picked up and transferred to another community. So inter-community communication and all of that is really valuable. The FCM has been pushing this for the last 20 years and with some success. So I think the level of literacy at the local government level in this country on what can be done to make the energy system in the community more sustainable and how it can be done is miles ahead of where it was when I first got involved with local government climate action. And well, for me, it was 1990. And we just need to keep educating those local counselors. You talk to them, they'll say, well, nobody ever calls me about this issue, so call them about it. Local building ordinances, making sure that all new buildings in the community are net zero, banning fossil fuel use from new buildings in the community, making sure that there's public electric vehicle charging in all new building in the community and in all new buildings, especially multifamily buildings, apartments and condos. It's really important. 3/4 of the buildings that are going up in this province right now are not single family homes. They're 75% of the residential building permits in Ontario for the last few years have been multifamily. That's where the construction is mostly taking place, even though it might look otherwise when you drive through the countryside and see these suburbs going in. So we have to keep the pressure on local building ordinances for efficiency. Look at what Toronto has done with their building uh, um, green building standards. That can be emulated. Um, I just think the local government forum has got huge possibilities for citizen engagement and action. There's the energy co-op in Ottawa is amazing. It's a bunch of citizens who raise significant amounts of capital for both solar and energy efficiency investments in their community. They raise the money right in the community. I mean, it's very powerful what groups of citizens can do once they put their minds to it and work together. And so I think local action is really going to be the key to this in the long run, as it always has been. Everything always comes back to the local level, a big change like this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for all those questions. And thank you, Ralph, for answering. I'm going to pass it back over to Alyssa so we can wrap up the webinar.
And I, in turn, I'm going to pass it back to Julia because we
Okay.
are going to take a photo. So if you've had your camera off for this meeting, if you're going to turn it on for any point, this would be a good point to turn it on so that Julia can get a picture of everybody's smiling faces, and not a bunch of black box screens if possible. So let us know when you're ready to take your picture, Julia.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm gonna try, see if it works, and then if not, we'll get Alyssa to try. But just getting this set up. Okay, so I'm gonna count down. So at 3.
I think you might need to take 2 pictures because we've got enough people.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So as I said, I'll start with 1. On 3, I'll take the screenshot. Let me just make sure I'm all ready. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me check. Make sure that's worked. Just waiting to see. Oh, okay, perfect. It's there. So that's all good. So let me just take the second one so we can get everybody in, and then this will be done. Okay, gonna do one more. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm just waiting to make sure this shows up. Okay, perfect. I've got that one too. Great. So this worked. Thank you everyone for smiling. And I'll pass it back to Alyssa.
Thank you for taking the picture, Julia. Appreciate it. And obviously, thank you to Ralph for coming and presenting all of this research to us. It's super awesome to see all of the data and the work that went into this, and so hot off the presses. Like just completed some of it this week or last week within a week, and we're seeing it. Wild. I am so happy that we have been able to hear all of this information. And we're so grateful to Ralph for taking the time to come and chat with us and answer our questions. And obviously, we are thankful to everyone for coming to our learning circle. If you want to rewatch this presentation, it'll be available soon on our YouTube channel at Climate Justice Durham. And we also want to announce some of our upcoming events. I'm just going to plug in my computer so it doesn't die, because that happened on one of our last meetings recently. And everybody got kicked out. So on September 1st, we're going to be at the Labor Day event in Memorial Park in Oshawa from 11 to 2. So you can come check out our table display, chat to people in person. We're going to have freezies if it's hot, if that is a draw. But always happy to talk about the intersections of climate and labor. And September 5th, we're going to be at the Climate Town Hall at Ontario Tech University in downtown Oshawa from 11 to 3, followed by a community cleanup in the Oshawa downtown area. And one of our members will be participating in a panel during the town hall. And then, of course, I saw it mentioned already during this webinar on September 20th, we are going to be going to the Draw the Line rally in Toronto. And this is part of a global day of action in advance of the upcoming Conference of the Parties. It's a collaboration with so many awesome climate groups across Canada, and we would love to have you come and join us. We're all going to be heading from Durham together to the rally via GO train. You can come join us. We're going to be leaving from Oshawa and Whitby, and if you're coming from any of the other municipalities as well along the train, we're happy to meet up with you there too. And we're going to be putting details about all of these on our website, Climate Justice Durham, and our social media channels as soon as possible. And if you're on our mailing list, you're going to get all this information directly to you. So that's kind of what we've got coming up. And we just want to take another second to kind of thank all of you for coming to join us. And we have a little poll. When I do this with the classes ITA, it's like a little exit poll. So if you can submit so we know where you're coming from, if you learned things, how you heard about it, if we're going to be taking this information and using it anywhere, that would be great. So we can have that and we can know what kind of topics people are interested in. So we can kind of have a variety of folks coming to our different learning circles. And trying to cover as many things as possible so we can educate and agitate. So please help us improve those sessions by responding to the poll. You can also reach us at climatejusticedurham@gmail.com. You can connect with Ralph on LinkedIn. We are also on LinkedIn. If you have other questions, I assume that LinkedIn is a good way to contact Ralph if you have other things you want to partake in his knowledge and wisdom further. But we are happy that you all came out and we hope you have a great rest of your night.